I'm Jane Alexander, Nantucket Book Festival alumna, welcoming you to At Home with Authors.
On this episode of At Home with Authors, there is no way we were going to let Ben Fountain's bookshelves just sit there as a backdrop. If you turn around and look at your bookshelves there, what would you pull out for us? Some good pandemic reading, maybe.
Well, that depends on if you're looking for something that might provide some answers or if you're looking for escape.
In a few minutes, Ben Fountain will guide us to the most impactful writers on his shelves. The last time Ben joined us at the Nantucket Book Festival in 2019, he had recently pivoted from novelist, winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award for Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, to journalist, reporting on the 2016 presidential election in beautiful country Burnagan.
We do have a beautiful country, and it has burned twice before, and it sort of feels like we may be on the cusp of a third burning.
Where are we now? Are we still on the cusp, or is it burning?
Well, when I was thinking about burning, I can tell you I wasn't thinking about a literal fever of the body, but that may be what ignites the third burning. I feel like, our political system, our social systems have been under a lot of stress, increasing stress for a long time. And I think that stress, that pressure has certainly not been relieved in the last few years, and has certainly increased. And now with the pandemic, it's what doctors call acute on chronic. It's as if you have lung cancer and then you get pneumonia. And so that's what this feels like, the pandemic on top of all these other stresses. So I would say we're closer.
I was looking Ben Fountain up to see what you were up to, and I came across this short piece of fiction that you just wrote I want to give a shout out to an incredible new site and project. It's called The Chronicles of Now. A former editor at Esquire of fiction, Tyler Cabot, created it. And it's probably got the best tagline I've ever seen: short fiction torn from today's headlines. And then the subtitle is, because in a world gone haywire, sometimes art is the only thing that can make sense of it all.
I would agree with that.
And so your piece, torn from the headlines, here was the headline, and then I'd like you to just read the first paragraph of that short piece of fiction. But the headline is, it was from the New York Times, a story on March 30th. For autocrats and others, coronavirus is a chance to grab even more power. And then the little outtake from that story: leaders around the world have passed emergency decrees and legislation expanding their reach during the pandemic. That's what you had to go on. You came up with this story, Rules of Special Measures. How did that process work?
I will be entirely honest. The notion for this story came to me a couple of years ago when I started seeing delivery vans that were unmarked, just these plain white vans. They just seemed to suddenly appear in North Dallas. And they struck me as kind of spooky. They had no logos, no lettering, just these white vans. And so I just started, a mind riff on, what if they started taking things away instead of bringing things to us? And anyway, once the pandemic got going, and just everybody's getting more and more deliveries, and really it's approaching, not quite the level of a lifeline, but that's how a lot of folks are getting what they need to live day to day. And then Tyler approached me and said, "Do you think you could come up with something?" And I thought, yeah, I've got this notion kicking around that seems to have, come into its own time. And, and, you know, and I was thinking more in terms of private enterprise and not so much governments as private enterprise running government and getting from government the kinds of authority that it needs to make more and more money. And so, I came up with this little story and Tyler published it.
Do you mind just reading the first paragraph?
Sure. Rules of special measures. There were as many trucks as ever, but now they took things away. FedEx, Amazon, UPS, they all did their part. But more often it was the boxy white Mercedes vans with the high roofs that had started showing up in the latter years of the boom. Plain white, no company name, no snappy logo on the side, which in our hyper-branded times might have briefly struck us as odd. And then they blended into the landscape of everything else. We didn't know how good we had it, did we? It was so easy, and how quickly we became used to it. The couple of keystrokes that produced the modern miracle of that package on our doorstep in 3 to 5 days, then 2, then next day, if we were willing to pay for it. And ultimately, how did they do it? The same day.
And what was the name you gave those guys who would get out of the van and come into your home? I can't remember, but it was sort of chilling in its antiseptic way.
Okay, recovery. Let's see, these were recovery techs. Yeah.
Recovery techs. So in this time that you're imagining, which may be tomorrow, the recovery tech is sort of a pretty good job. There are a lot of openings for recovery techs.
Yeah, and they tend to be, people who are more physically inclined, more physically gifted in terms of bulk and height.
Well, we're posting the entire story with Tyler's permission on the Nantucket Book Festival website on at Home with Authors. And I challenge anybody to read that story and look at a white van the same way again. Since we were speaking about your last book, which was you on the campaign trail, you mentioned your roots in North Carolina. Your maternal grandfather's a tobacco farmer. You spent your summers at a farm, wanted to be a farmer for a long time. And you mentioned that most of your family, politically speaking, voted for Trump, and you called them well-educated, prosperous people with good hearts. And I just wonder what your family, you've got your ear to the ground, where are they right now in the political situation and the cultural situation?
I don't think any minds have been changed. I think they're still inclined to be Trump supporters. I think there's more awareness. I'm sure there's more awareness that he has deep character flaws, and I mean that's come up in conversations the last year or two to the effect of, yeah, he lies. You can't trust anything he says. He's kind of a jerk, et cetera, but he's good for the economy. He's doing things that need to be done. And so, he still has our support. So I think there's more recognition, certainly among the people who I know and my relatives, that the current president, there are real problems with this guy, but I haven't seen any wavering of support.
Many people have commented on this kind of anti-elite resentment that fueled the upswing in Trump support. But you put it in a way that I had really never heard before.
How strange that this star and symbol of big city life should become the hero of the heartland. All those millions of wholesome acres of Bible belts that trust the nation's middle and nether regions. The guy from Sodom and Gomorrah was all right. His insults and earthiness were received as authenticity. Here at last was a man who would stick it to the elites after all these years of eating their crap.
Is that the same driving emotion that's keeping this situation the way it is?
I think that's one of them. And you know, even more than just elitism for its own sake, there's the sense that people who hold themselves out as elites, intellectual elites, you know, business elites, that they've forgotten working people, and the system that's been made by the elites not only isn't working for working people, but it's shafting them, and actually I think that's a correct viewpoint in a lot of ways. As far as the current president himself, you know, so much has been said. I would say that it's almost, I mean, a great deal of his power is emotional, certainly not based on rationality, very little of it. It's almost like he's had the country in a kind of trance or under a spell ever since 2015. And that spell is still holding. A critical mass of the country is still in that trance. And someday we will wake up from it, and he will have his downfall. But I see the trance holding strong for now, and I think it will for a while longer. You know, one thing I've been thinking about is, I mean, the Supreme Court, those justices must be having some very interesting conversations with themselves right now before they go to bed at night, wondering what they're going to do with the Affordable Care Act. Are they really, and I'm talking about the conservative justices, are they really going to declare the ACA unconstitutional in the midst of a pandemic? And so that's something I think about a lot, and not a whole lot of people are talking about it, but to me, it's almost like the grand piano hanging over us, hanging by a thread. And if that thread is cut.
You called it acute on chronic. I was thinking that's quite a way to break the trance.
You know, ultimately, that's what does it. I mean, even the best magicians and jugglers and hypnosis specialists, sooner or later we wake up. Reality is stronger than any of us, and I think, you know, sooner or later that's what's going to happen.
You know, I can't help looking at your bookshelves in the back. You know, this is a treat for everybody. We all get to come into the homes of our favorite authors, and if we were in your home and you were out making yourself some coffee, we'd probably be browsing around the shelves looking for the influences. If you turn around and look at your bookshelves there, you know, what would you pull out for us? Some good pandemic reading, maybe.
Well, that depends on if you're looking for something that might provide some answers, or if you're looking for escape.
You know what? I think we're all looking for both. Why don't you give that a shot?
To look for answers, I would say pull down a book like Norman Mailer's Miami and the Siege of Chicago. I would say pull down some books by Gary Wills, some books by James Baldwin, both fiction and essays. Madeline Robinson and Zadie Smith are both doing incredibly fine work on trying to, you know, shed some light on why things are the way they are these days. So, you know, looking for answers, those are the books that I have found, you know, really have helped me try to make some sense out of what's been happening lately.
So since we've got a lot of serious readers watching this, you want to just tick those off and just to give us thumbnails of what answers you're getting from those authors: Mailer, Baldwin, Robinson, Smith, Wills, anyone you want to choose.
James Baldwin, he's got to be one of the top 2 or 3 American writers of all time. And he had a hard life. He came up extremely tough. And to see not only the artistry with which he depicts human experience, but the generosity of heart. The great degree of compassion and forgiveness, while never losing sight of, these very systemic and individual cruelties. I think he's not only an American master, he's an American miracle. Just like Walt Whitman was a miracle, just like Faulkner was a miracle, these people who come out of nowhere and they're geniuses. Geniuses not only of their art, but also of the heart. I mean, just, their humanity is really an example that the rest of us should try to emulate. Zadie Smith has been, she's been drilling down so deeply and so thoughtfully into economic and political and racial matters. She had this great piece on Brexit right after Brexit passed. And I think it's called Fences. And she was diagnosing Brexit as it was the working people's chance to throw a monkey wrench into the workings of the neoliberal system that had shafted them the last 40 years. And they took it. They took that opportunity. But also the work she's been doing on issues of cultural appropriation, it's just very thoughtful, I think. Madeline Robinson, her deep dives into American history and how that history shapes and informs our present. I think she's a maestro of elucidation and clear thinking, and that's firmly grounded in deep, deep history.
And how about The Escape?
Oh, The Escape. Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, which, it has, I'm not saying it's pure escape. That book is full of real stuff. But just as far as a novel that you can lose yourself in and disappear from the world, that's one of those novels. Another one would be A Soldier of the Great War by Mark Helprin. That's just a wonderful book. Little Big Man by Thomas Berger. Those are the ones that come to mind right now.
So in terms of escapes, we had a little debate when you were at the Athenaeum in Nantucket last summer, because after talking about your fantastic reportage on the presidential campaign, you said you were now embarking on a work of fiction. And I was not alone in urging you to just give it one more shot as a reporter during this critical time, and you were not having it. You had a lot on your mind because you were absorbed. I think you said you were about 250 pages into this next novel. I don't know if novelists like to get asked, hey, how's that novel going? But I have to.
Well, I don't mind being asked. And I will freely admit that the answer changes not only from day to day, but hour to hour. But working on it makes me happy. And that feels like enough right now. I get up in the morning and I'm ready to go work on it. I want to see what happens because, in a lot of instances, I don't know what's going to happen. And so, I'm going on faith. And so far, it seems to be revealing itself to me, and I'm learning things along the way. So far, so good. Thank you for asking.
So given everything, this is a question we are asking all the authors we're speaking with now at Home with Authors. And we're actually going to string these answers together. But basically, given our times, given the specific challenges we're facing now, what gives you hope?
One of the things that gives me hope is the sheer variousness of America and the American people, and the depth and breadth of culture in this country. Just cultures from all over the world. And so I think, and also, Americans tend to be pretty stubborn. And so I think it would be difficult for any particular leader or movement to try to shoehorn all that rambunctious energy and culture into one particular channel. And so I think just our sheer unruliness is something that gives me hope. I mean, this beautiful unruliness. I think there's been a rise of genuine grassroots movements, political, environmental, and otherwise, particularly in the last 5 years. And these are local communities of people who aren't waiting around for, anybody, in Washington, D.C., in the political parties or in the bureaucracy to make things better. They're taking it on themselves. And I think that's tremendously hopeful in a lot of ways. And I will say this, the poets.
Sorry?
The poets. This is a golden age of American poetry. There are a lot of really great poets out there doing a lot of great work, and all these small publishers publishing the work in these beautiful editions. And nobody's making any money at it. So obviously they're doing it for the love of the art. And, they're on the truth and beauty team. And so seeing what the poets do and how well they're doing it, I feel like there's a vibrant beating heart in America.
That's so interesting. Is there a particular poet you want to point us to again in the spirit of you've got your eyes out on all these authors?
Ishan Hutchinson is one. Morgan Parker.
Morgan Parker was with us last summer, I think, or the summer before.
The summer before, I think. I think she's great.
Yeah.
She's wonderful.
And she's got a great sense of humor.
Oh,
she's one of these people who combines dealing with the most painful aspects of American culture and still retaining her sense of humor.
Yes, she has a big heart. And, but always very clear-eyed too. I mean, that's a tough act to pull off. I mean, to keep your humanity while looking at things and seeing them for what they are. And I think especially for a person of color, in this country, a country where the mainstream culture is very white. Terrence Hayes is another, Ross Gay, Roger Reeves, Jericho Brown, Kate Marvin. There's just a lot of fine poets out there doing great work. And I haven't mentioned a tenth of the people who I try to keep up with.
Has reading poetry impacted your writing style?
I hope so. That's one of the reasons I read it. I want to try to stay in touch with that wonderful concentration and compression that the good poets bring, not just to language, but to experience. And I don't think language is a question of, quote, mere style. I think the language, what some people would call style, is very much bound up in the way a particular writer is seeing the world and trying to make sense of his or her experience. And so just that wonderful concentration of language that the poets practice on a daily basis, I think all writers should try to emulate that and at least stay in tune with it and keep reminding ourselves of what language is possible of.
It's so interesting because I think I used the word style and you corrected me. And this is why you're influenced more by the poets than I am. You brought it down to concentration and compression. I love that. I mean, that analysis is going to impact whatever I do to write around this video piece that we're that we're doing now.
Okay.
Well, listen, what should we call our conversation as we leave right now? What should the title of this conversation be?
Thinking in the time of COVID. I think one of the real challenges in this culture, and especially right now, is not to avoid the temptation to be numb and dumb, because that's what so much of our culture wants us to be. It's easier to sell somebody something if they're numbed out and dumbed down. And so I think citizens in a democracy, human beings, should always be alert and aware. And especially these days when there's so much noise and so much, not just disinformation, but outright lying going on. And so I think it's a daily act of resistance and a daily act of humanity to keep our wits about us and to keep thinking for ourselves. And so I would say thinking in the time of COVID.
Thank you for helping us clarify our thoughts in the time of COVID.
Thank you for having me, Michael. It's a pleasure as always.